Persuasive speaking, just like informative speaking, has some clear and distinct types of persuasive speaking, and that differ based on the primary way they're organized and what you as the speaker are trying to prove, essentially what your burden of proof is for giving that type of speech. So what those various types of speeches are in persuasive speaking, what your burden is, and the primary ways to organize them are the subject of this video. Okay, so in persuasive speaking, there's three fundamental types of persuasive speeches. Now, as with all things, one is not better than the other. They are just different. They are different in what you're trying to prove in one is not the same as what you're trying to prove in another, all right? So what are these various types? Well, there's three main ones, and these are questions of fact, questions of value, and questions of policy. Now, all three of these can and often do exist on the same issue. And it's also important to note that your opinion on one does not necessarily predict your opinion on the other, okay? They are separate and individual from each other. Again, one's not better, they're just different. So let's talk about what each one of these are, how they're organized, and what your burden of proof is when you give this type of speech. So let's start off with the question of fact. Now, when you are arguing a question of fact, you are dealing with the truth or falsity of an assertion. You're basically putting forth an idea and then trying to prove whether that idea is true or false. Now, notice I did not say right or wrong, and that's on purpose. All right, we'll get to that in a second. We're talking about true or false. An example of this would be if I was to say, Lee Harvey Oswald did not shoot John F. Kennedy. Now, can we agree that is either a true statement or a false statement? He either did or he didn't. Even if there was other shooters on the grassy knoll, if he made one of the shots, he tried, so he would have been involved. But if he didn't, he didn't. Same thing. Excuse me. If I was to say Bigfoot exists, can we agree Bigfoot either does or does not exist? There's no in between there. Okay, that's a question of fact. You put forth an assertion and you say this is true or this is false. So another example that we'll use for all three of these is let's use the issue of the death penalty. Now, a question of fact that often exists on the death penalty is, does the death penalty deter crime? Now, we can say it either does or it doesn't. You can go, well, it kind of does. Well, then it does. If it deters it by 0.01%, that is a deterrent. We can argue about how big that is, but it is a deterrent, all right? If it's just 0.01%, that is a deterrent, all right? So that's what we mean by true or false, not right or wrong, true or false. And you often, some of the funny questions of fact deal with things like conspiracy theories, like do UFOs exist? Did a UFO crash in Roswell? Is the Bermuda Triangle a real thing? Those type of things. But we have more serious ones that we deal with all the time in politics. Death penalty is one. Issue of abortion, which we talked about in a previous video. Does life begin at conception? True or false? Some people say it does, others don't. Those are all issues that involve a question of fact. Now, when you give a question of fact speech, the primary way you tend to structure it is in topical order. Now, if you remember back to when we talked about the various speech order types, topical order is when you give independent reasons, 2, 3, 4, whatever, independent reasons as to why whatever you're arguing is true or false, okay? So if I were to say, yes, the death penalty does deter crime. 1, death penalty deters murders, blah, 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 blah. 2, the death penalty deters burglary, da, 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 da. That's topical order. Or, no, it does not deter crime because it's been illegal and people still do it. And it is illegal this, whatever. Okay, so that's topical order. Those independent reasons why, 2 or 3 main reasons why you believe something to be proven to be true or false. And that's what you're trying to prove. Not that it's right or wrong. We'll get to that in a second. But that statement is true or false. So that's your burden of proof. So it's important to remember that. Now, when you're dealing with issues of right or wrong, That's a question of value, right? Because that deals with the rightness or wrongness of an idea or action. Let's go back to the death penalty. Question of fact, does the death penalty deter crime? Question of value, is the death penalty moral? Is it the right thing for the state to do? And here's we go back to that idea of your opinion on one does not necessarily predict the other. Could you, for example, believe that yes, the death penalty does deter crime, but it is an immoral act? Yeah, you could just as easily believe, the death penalty doesn't deter any crime, but it's the right thing to do because of justice. Both of those are equally valid points of view, and you see how they don't necessarily line up? So it's important to keep that in mind. So when you're dealing with morality, issues of right and wrong, that's a question of value. And this brings up a very important point. When you are going to argue a question of value, whether or not something is right or wrong from a moral standpoint, part of that speech needs to be you explaining what you mean as right or wrong. What is your moral standard, if you will, for what is right and wrong? You may think, well, isn't that pretty obvious? No, there's different ones. Let me give you one of the classic ones in philosophy. There's the debate between, and I'm going to get a little deep here, but I'll explain myself. There's a long-standing debate in philosophy dealing with the morality of action that deals with deontology versus utilitarianism. And I can already hear some of you going, I don't know what either one of those is. You do, but you might not know the terms, okay? Utilitarianism says an action is moral if it provides the greatest good to the greatest number. So if I have 100 people in a room and I am told if you kill 49 of them, the other 51 will live, utilitarian would say that's a just action because more people will live than die. All right? I know that's an extreme example, but you get the point. Whereas deontology, and by the way, yes, if a philosophy professor heard this explanation, they'd probably have a brain hemorrhage because they'd be like, oh, it's much more complicated. Yes, it is, but basic course, I'm keeping it simple. Whereas deontology basically says an action is either moral or immoral in a vacuum. Okay, you cannot look at the consequences. You have to look at the action in a vacuum. So deontology would look at that and go, no. If somebody says, if you kill 49, 51 will live. But if you don't, everybody dies. A deontologist would say, I'm not killing anyone because murder is wrong. Then you might go, well, you're going to kill everyone. Doesn't matter. Opinion in a vacuum. Now, why these two opinions, you can obviously see why these two opinions tend to be in conflict. And basically, utilitarianists look at deontologists and say, you have to look at consequences as part of your actions. If not, you're not analyzing everything. But deontologists look at utilitarianists and say, if you start looking at consequences and that becomes part of your analysis, then you can basically make anything moral under certain circumstances, and that's not accurate. So you see the conflict there. And I know this may seem a little complex, but I am almost positive almost every one of you is familiar with this. You just don't know you are. Classic example of this in pop culture that you might be familiar with boils down to this one central question. Why doesn't Batman just kill Joker? I mean, just think about it. Joker's in Arkham. He breaks out just because. He breaks out and then he kills and terrorizes people. Batman eventually captures him and they put him back in Arkham. And then he breaks out again and he tortures and kills people. And then Batman catches him, puts him back, and this cycle keeps repeating. Utilitarianists would say, just kill him. Next time he breaks out, don't capture him and put him back, just kill him. Think of all the lives you will save. But Batman, in this instance, is a deontologist. He will not kill. Now, part of that's because he said it's a line. He's afraid if he ever crosses, he can't come back. He also says it makes him just as bad as the people he fights. Those are his reasonings. He's looking at it in a vacuum. All right? So that fundamental question with Batman is this argument between utilitarianists and deontologists. All right? So questions of value, again, deal with these issues of morality. Is the death penalty moral? Is abortion moral? Is military intervening in XYZ country a moral idea? Should they fight on themselves? Anytime you're arguing morality, you're dealing with a question of value. And You need to put forth that idea as part of your speech is what you mean by a moral action, how you determine that. And just like with questions of fact, questions of value tend to be organized in topical order. The death penalty is moral. Why? Because it fulfills the sense of justice that we need in society. And by justice, I mean this, and it fulfills this by this. 2, it is also moral because it provides for an organized society which we need to save lives, blah, 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 and vice versa, all right? So that independent reasons why it is morally right or morally wrong, that's a question of value. So that's fact and value. And that leads us to our third type, which is a question of policy. Now, what is different here is in fact and value, you're arguing whether or not a statement is true or false, or whether or not an idea is right or wrong from a moral perspective. In a question of policy, you are arguing whether or not a specific course of action should or should not be taken. Another way of putting that is you're arguing the how do we go about doing it, or how do we go about fixing it. And most of the time, when you get to the policy level question, at least internally, you have settled, at least in your own mind, the fact value question. All right? Because if I'm still on the fence about whether or not the death penalty is moral or immoral, I can't make up my mind. Am I interested in debating how we should carry it out? No, I haven't even made up my mind if we should be doing it yet. Same thing with the question of fact. If I'm still on the fence, like I don't know if it deters or not and how that plays with this value, you're not interested in getting here yet. You're not there. And you may see this as a reason why often in politics we have so much conflict, is you have some people arguing questions of policy on issues that their opposition isn't even at the policy stage yet. They don't even think there's an issue or a problem, or they're not even sure. And that's why you have those problems. So anytime you deal with the how of something, that's the question of policy. Again, on the death penalty. Question of fact, does it deter crime? Question of value, is it moral? Policy question, should we when you execute, should you use lethal injection, the electric chair, or the gas chamber? That's dealing with the how. What crimes should rate the death penalty is a question of policy. You see, I'm not arguing about the morality or the fact of it. I'm saying this is how we should go about doing it. That how is how you organize a question of policy. Now, when you do a question of policy, you tend to have two different primary goals, two basic end games that you have for that audience, all right? And the first one of these is what we call passive agreement. When you are given a question of policy and you are seeking passive agreement from an audience, essentially what that means is when you are done, you want the audience to think your idea is a good one, but you're not asking them to do anything. It's basically, remember this for later on at some point when you might have the ability to take action, you'll take the action I've suggested in that case, okay? Example, you may be seeing ads, we start presidential elections, honestly, like the year before they actually happen because of all the process. So people giving speeches asking people to vote for them the year before the actual election are seeking passive agreement. You can't go out and vote right then. They're just trying to get you on their page so that when you have the opportunity in the future, then you'll remember and take action. But I'm not asking you to do anything now. The flip side to that is speeches that seek immediate action. I'm wanting you to do something now or in the very, very, very near future. I'm giving you a speech asking you to vote for me in the elections tomorrow. That's seeking immediate action. I'm giving a speech about this organization and I'm going to ask you to give money right at the end of my speech. That's seeking immediate action. So those are the two differences. And those are different end goals, but it only kind of slightly changes how you're going to set the speech up, okay? But regardless of which one of those you're seeking, again, you're talking about the how of something. Now, unlike questions of fact and value, when you are putting together a policy speech, there are certain things, issues, you may say, we often refer to these as stock issues, that you have to have in a policy speech, that you don't have to have in questions of fact or value, but you have to have them in a policy speech. The first one is you need to show the need. Remember, policy speeches are typically advocating that we do something, all right, X, whatever it is. So the first thing you have to prove in your speech is that there is a need for change. There is a problem out there that one won't fix itself, because some problem, if you hate winter, summer will eventually get here. That problem will fix itself, okay? That one, this problem is not going to fix itself. And two, it's big enough that we actually need to address it. Because let's just be honest, there are problems that we face all the time that we just deal with, all right? There's probably things that you've had to deal with that you don't like, you wish it would go away, but you're not actively doing anything to fix it because you've kind of done, this is how much time and effort it's going to take to fix this thing. And here's the level of, irkness it causes. I'll just deal with it, all right? So you need to prove there's a problem, it's not going to fix itself, and it's reached a point that we need to do something about it. We can't just live with it anymore, all right? You have to prove that. And why that is, well, why should we change anything if there's not a problem? It's that whole if it's not broke, don't fix it deal. That's what you're proving with the need, that it is broke, hence we need to fix it. Second policy issue or stock issue that you have to have in a question of policy speech is you need to offer a plan. You have to offer the plan. You do not make a policy speech and go, there's our problem. Now we need to do something about it. I don't care what you do, just do something. No. One, because that leaves the audience with the ability to go, well, yeah, it's a problem, but we can't do anything about it, so we just have to live with it, sorry. Or two, you're right, I'm going to take this course and do this thing, and that's not at all what you were hoping they'd do, all right? So you need to offer a plan. If you are going to advocate change, it is your responsibility to advocate for said change and what exactly needs to happen. And in that plan, you need to be sure you clearly specify a few things. One, who's doing your plan? Okay, what we would call the actor. For example, is it something that the state legislature should do, or is it something the federal government should do? Is it something that the United Nations should do? Okay, those are different actors. Okay, so who should take the lead on this? Who should do your plan, and what specifically you want them to do? You don't just say the school board should take steps to address this. You say the school board should do X, Y, and Z. Clearly lay out your plan, what you want them to do. And then the last thing, and this is often something that's overlooked, is if your plan will cause money to be spent, how are you going to pay for it? Now, I know some of you may say, how am I supposed to figure that out? You find a way. Do your research, interview people, find out. If your plan costs money, you have to propose a way to pay for it. Because if you don't, then the single simplest way that your opposition can get out of having to do or even pay attention to your plan is go, great idea, but we can't pay for it. Can't make that argument if I specified a way to pay for it, what we would call a funding mechanism. Okay? Now, let me give you a little tip here, something I've learned over the years. Let's just take a school board. I go to the school board and I say, here's a problem with the way we're currently doing things. I explain my need. I then give my plan and I talk about this is what I want. I want you to do these actions and here's how we should pay for it. And then I get through the rest of my speech. And then I get some questions at the end, but the questions are all about funding. They're all about funding. What should that tell you? Means you've persuaded them on the problem and that your plan's a good idea. Nobody is questioning whether or not your plan is a good idea or if it even could fix the problem. All the focus is on the money. Here's the deal. I know money's a big thing, but if me and you are on the same page that yes, there's a problem and yes, this is a great idea to fix it, and all we're disagreeing about is just how to fund it, we can probably hash that out because we have so much in common. We can figure out that funding piece. But if we're not even on the same page as far as what to do, that's not going to happen. So plan, who's going to do it, what they're doing, and if it costs money, how are you going to pay for it? And then lastly, you have to demonstrate practicality, i.e., your plan will do two things. One, it will solve the problem. And two, won't create new other problems. Okay? So first off, you pointed out that there's this problem that we need to fix. You need to show and document, give, example, statistics, testimony, whatever, saying that this plan that I proposed will fix this problem. Great. You need to prove that. But then you also got to think about, is this going to create other issues that we're not dealing with now? For example, here in Northern Kentucky, we have the Brent Spence Bridge that goes from Northern Kentucky over to Cincinnati. And the bridge needs repair. It's always a big subject of local politics. What are we going to do about this bridge? So let's say I come to you and I go, all right, we need to fix this bridge. Why? Because the bridge is unsafe and it's costing too much money. I do my need. So here's what we're going to do. The city of Cincinnati and the city of Covington are going to team up 50-50, and we're going to tear down the bridge, and we're going to replace it with a ferry service. Ferry service is going to cost about this much money. This is what we're currently paying on just maintenance. As you see, this will cover the ferries and will save money long term, because this is how much the ferry service is going to cost us versus what we're paying now. That's how we're going to pay for it. We tear down the bridge. We don't have all these safety problems anymore. We don't have to sink all this money into basically painting a pile of junk, because it's going to have a brand new service. It's going to be more cost effective, and it's going to be safer. Case closed, right? Well, okay, you might have addressed the safety concerns and the cost concerns about the bridge, but if you tear it down and replace it with a ferry service where you had like 2 boats and you filled it up on each side of the Ohio River and went to the other, then offloaded and took another load and came back, what's that going to do to traffic? You'd have a parking lot from the river down to Lexington. See, that's what I mean by it's not going to cause any additional problems. And I've often found that that is something people forget to think about. They get so concerned on problem fixing, they don't think about post my solution, what other things could this cause to crop up that aren't issues now. And you need to think about that as a policy speech, and that's part of your practicality. Now, we said that questions in fact and value are often done in topical order. Policy is different. Okay, there's a couple different ways that you can organize policy speeches. And the first one, the oldie but goodie, is standard problem solution order. Okay, in this type of speech, you have 2 main points. Big surprise. First one's the problem. Second one's the solution. Your problem main point is where you explain the need, identify the problem, explain why it's big enough, we have to do something about it. It's not just going to fix itself. And then the solution main point is you offer your plan and then demonstrate its practicality. It's simple, it's clean, but it's incredibly effective. Okay, it's the oldie but goodie. But it's not our only option. The next option we have is what we call problem cause solution. Now, and here you have 3 main points. First main point is the problem, second main point is the cause, and then the third is the solution. Now, what's different here is, as you can see, here you have 2 main points to educate the audience about your issue. You point out the problem, you establish this is what the problem is, this is why we need to do something, but then you spend time talking about what caused this problem to happen before you offer your solution. Now, when might it be a good idea to go with problem cause solution over just basic problem solution? 2 broad instances. Number 1, remember how we talked about one type of persuasive speaking is creating an audience's opinion from scratch? If you know you're doing that, problem cause solution might be the better option, because in a structured way, it gives you more main points to actually educate the audience about the issue before you offer your plan, and hence trying to create their opinion. That's 1. Second is, if the problem is incredibly complex, you might need to do problem cause solution so that you can more clearly connect your solution, your plan, to one of those root causes to better demonstrate how your plan can ultimately have practicality. So, you're creating the audience's opinion from scratch, or it's an incredibly complex problem, might want to go with problem cause solution. Our third one is called comparative advantage. Now, comparative advantage is unique, and that what makes it unique is that it's a policy speech, but it's kind of done in topical order. When you give a speech that's comparative advantage, you're not so much trying to convince the audience from scratch. They've already decided to do something. You're now just trying to persuade them to do one of the options over the other. Like, if you want to go buy a gaming system, your primary options are the Xbox, the PlayStation, and Nintendo. And if I'm going to say you should get the Xbox, that would be comparative advantage, because I would say the Xbox is better than the other two for these 3 reasons. Notice, I'm not trying to persuade you to get a game system. You're already doing that. It's now about options. It's like there's a difference between telling you you need to vote versus when you vote for this person. Okay. Just that you need to vote is a question of trying to get you to do something. Okay. That's a policy speech that you general problem solution. You need to vote for this person is comparative advantage because I'm saying this person is better than the other ones for X, Y, Z. See the difference there? And then our last one is what we call Monroe's motivated sequence. Now, Monroe's motivated sequence, and I don't like to think of it as a speech order. It's more so, I would think of it as a checklist, because you can do Monroe's motivated sequence in like basic problem solution. But it's a series of things you need to be sure that you do specifically when you are trying to seek immediate action, okay? And what are these? First, you need to get the audience's attention. Well, you do this in your introduction. We've already discussed that. The second thing you need to do in Monroe's motivated sequence is establish a need. You want to point out to the audience there's a problem, needs a solution, kind of gone there. Then we have what's called the satisfaction stage. This is when you offer your solution to the need. You then have the visualization step. This is what you want when you want the audience to picture how much better their life would be if you did whatever you're arguing for in the satisfaction step. And then lastly, and this is the unique thing, we have an action step. This is where I tell the audience specifically, this is what you need to do, this is how you do it, and this is when you need to do it by. You tell them what you want them to do, how to go about doing it, and you put a time limit on it. All right? And there is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. This works. All right? Think about this. I want you to think of any infomercial on TV you have ever seen. And then look at these 5 steps. Have you ever had a problem with this? Think about this, and you can't do this. We have this thing to fix it. It's going to do this for you. It's going to do this for you. It's going to do this for you. If you'd like to take advantage, call this number now. And if you call within the next 5 minutes, we'll throw in X, Y, Z. Monroe's motivated sequence. So it's incredibly effective for speeches in which you're trying to get action. But again, you can do it in problem solution orders, why I think it's more of a checklist. The attention would be in the intro, need would be in the problem, satisfaction and visualization would be in the solution main point, then the action step would be part of your conclusion. So those are the main types of persuasive speeches and how they should be organized. So questions of fact, value, and policy, your 3 basic types of persuasive speech. And again, I don't care what your topic is, how long your speech is, what your audience is, your speech will always minimally fall into one of these categories if it's a proper persuasive speech. So anytime you're giving a persuasive speech, ask yourself which one of these 3 it falls into. And then based on that, you now have the guidance and understanding to know this is my burden of proof and this is how I need to organize it. And following those guidelines can help, again, set you up to be a great persuasive speaker.